Hi, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. I've had a great stay here in South Carolina. We're going to look at, just to start out, we're going to look at three clips from three different films. The first is Freedom Riders, the next is Freedom Summer, and the third is the film that we just finished, Tell Them We Are Rising, which is a history of black colleges and universities. That film we just finished, and it'll air on PBS nationally, everywhere, a year from now. So next February, it'll air everywhere across the country. So I know it's a long time from now, but please let people know. I have some cards that we'll put right outside here somehow, or have somebody at the door to give you when you go out that tells a little information about the film. One of the things that we're doing with the film is our website is hbcurising.com, and we're doing what we call a digital yearbook, and we're asking people to upload any kind of stills that they may have of themselves, their parents, grandparents, kids, anybody who attended HBCU's, letters, diaries, and that digital yearbook is going to live forever at the Schomburg Collection in New York. So we're really excited about that. Excuse me, and the card that we'll hand out, we'll tell you some more about how to do that. Let me just really quickly set the scene of the clips you're going to see here. So the first one is Freedom Riders, and we're almost in the middle of the film. We're looking at a clip. The first Freedom Riders in 1961 were 13 people who started out, white and black, from Washington, D.C., and taking Greyhound and Trailways buses down through the South. And they were trying to take the bus. All they were trying to do was get on a Greyhound bus, regular Greyhound bus, Trailways bus that you pay money for, you buy a ticket, and go from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans. That's what they were trying to do. They were beaten so badly in Alabama that they had to turn back, and they had to turn back and give up. They could not continue. And where we pick it up, the Freedom Rides are really dead. And the first person you see is John Siegenthaler, who was emissary of Bobby Kennedy, and he comes down to help get the first load of Freedom Riders out of Alabama and safely home. And the Freedom Rides, for all extents and purposes, are dead. So you're going to see that clip. The next clip you'll see is a shorter clip from the beginning of the film Freedom Summer. So it's just the first 3 or 4 minutes, I think, of Freedom Summer. And then the third clip is a clip from the latest film, Tell Them We Are Rising, which this is kind of near the end of the film and tells the story of the sit-in movement of 1960, which really started with black college students at North Carolina A&T, and then spread to black college students all over the South. So you see those three clips, and then we'll all come back up on stage to talk about the films and other things. So I look forward to talking to you after the clips, and I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks all of you for being here tonight. Before we begin a very brief dialogue and open the floor for discussion, I want to commend the Media and Civil Rights Symposium led by Chris Freer and Dr. Kenneth Campbell, our colleague Professor Pat Sullivan, the director of the History Center, our colleague Belinda Littlefield, director of the African American Studies program, for helping to host this event here tonight in this space. This is the centennial anniversary of the famed Booker T. Washington High School. This structure, the auditorium, was built in 1956 in hopes that if they built a nice auditorium, it might shortchange the Brown v. Board decision. It was a school that was built with funds that were promoting the equalization of schools. And the hope was that if schools were equalized, African Americans would not seek to integrate schools otherwise. This year is an incredible year for the school as it marks a century of service to this community. When the school opened in 1916, within a year of the school opening, a very young student named Donella Brown entered Booker T. Washington. We're fortunate tonight that her daughter is here. Donella Brown Wilson is today, Ms. Bivens, 107 years young. And she's also, Stanley, the oldest living graduate of Allen University.
Wow.
As well, where we were recently. Now, on behalf of everyone in Columbia and everyone here at USC, I want to commend Stanley Nelson. Stanley Nelson is really famous and really quite important, but he does not behave as though he's famous and important. He arrived in Columbia on Wednesday. He had a talkback session at the Nickelodeon on Wednesday night with our colleague, Cleveland Sellers. Early on Thursday morning, he joined others for a tour of Allen University and Benedict College, and then he gave a presentation in the famed Chappelle Auditorium, and then he came to USC to speak to colleagues and students, and then Thursday night, he had a dialogue discussion with our mayor, Steve Benjamin, and then today, he delivered the keynote address at the Media and Civil Rights Symposium. And here he is now on the stage of the Booker T. Washington Auditorium, joined by one of my mentors, the great photographer and historian in his own right, Mr. Cecil Williams. Cecil is a native of Orangeburg and a very proud graduate of Claflin University. We have with us today two very distinguished documentarians. And I want to begin our dialogue by just simply asking both what motivated you, what inspired you to do what you're doing now?
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to be here. I've had a great time, and people have treated me so wonderfully. So it sounded like a lot of work, what you just said, but it's all been really fun, so I just want to say that. One of the reasons I just want to say, too, why I used those three clips, here at Booker T. Washington, or what was formerly Booker T. Washington High School, was that, these were clips that centered on the role of young people in the civil rights movement. I think that's really important that we understand the role of young people in movements, the civil rights movement, and movements all around the world. I think there's a lot of things that motivated me. I think if there was one thing, I would say my mother was a librarian, and and I didn't think it meant that much to me, but my mother was this person that made us always have a library card, and we always had to have a book. And we had, in the summertime, we had reading hour, where we had to read for an hour. Everybody, there were four of us, so we had to separate and read for an hour. And it just stuck, and it just stuck. And I was not that academic person. I was the kid, I went to a very small school, high school, and I was on the basketball team, and I wanted to play in the NBA. That was, that's what I wanted to do. But that kind of didn't work out. I wasn't nearly good enough to even play in college, much less the NBA. But so I wasn't an academic. But when I started doing some research and looking through old pictures and stuff like that, and old newspapers, I found that I was really fascinated by it. That it was just something that I liked to do, and so I just kind of took it from there.
Mr. Williams?
Well, growing up in Orangeburg, right down the road from here, it was just the thing to be, the thing to do. It just came natural to be a part of the civil rights movement. That, in my opinion, and in the documentation I've made for the books I've published, which really kind of leads you to believe that the civil rights movement really began here in South Carolina, Clarendon County. And I kind of grew up in that environment. And since then, I've become really passionate about history, because I believe that it has a purpose, and it has a benefit to all. And I think that if we can learn our history and retain it and understand it, the society we have today won't be apt to repeat some of the mistakes we've made in the past. I grew up also, like Mr. Nelson, in a family where my mother was a school teacher. My father was a tailor in downtown Orangeburg, and they warned me about the dangers of being involved in the activities going on, and they told me that they believed in what I was doing. But at this time, though, things were changing. My parents had endured segregation and Jim Crow by accommodating what was happening to them and the laws that affected them. wherein my generation was arriving at a point where we were beginning to retaliate against it and take it on and make it a passion to overcome and improve.
Stanley, last year you received a Lifetime Emmy Award, and these were your words upon accepting that award. You said, "I believe one of the biggest reasons we've gotten to this point is our failure to tell the full American story, to let through the voices of people and communities who are increasingly the numerical majority, but who live in the margins of our political process and our culture, including on television. Our failure to tell the full American story creates a fear and longing for a past that never existed." Would you care to explain to this audience, how do you see yourself as someone challenging the received narrative of American history?
Well, I mean, I think that you know, my films tend to talk about a past that we don't normally see in the history books, and we don't normally see in film, and is definitely not taught to younger African Americans or white Americans or Latino Americans or any Americans. So I'm trying to tell stories that haven't been told. I'm also really interested in, you know, this is just my own interest for whatever reason. I'm interested in telling stories of groups and movements rather than the kind of narrative of the great man. You know, I mean, I can also say great woman, but it's always pretty much great man theory of history, you know, and I just don't, I mean, that's fine, you know, I mean, Martin Luther King is Martin Luther King. I don't, you know, want to take anything away from him. But, you know, just for me, myself, I'm much more interested in the people who stood behind Martin Luther King, the people who had to stay in those towns and cities when Martin Luther King left. And I tend to just be more interested in movements, you know, the Freedom Riders, the Freedom Summer movement, the Black Panthers film that we did last year, and, you know, the story of HBCUs rather than because I think that's really who makes history, our movements and institutions. I made a film about the black press years ago, and I made a film just this year on historically black colleges and universities, because I think that we don't have a lot of institutions in the African American community. We didn't have a lot of institutions, but we did have some that grounded the community, and the two of those really important have been black newspapers and historically black colleges. And I feel like, you know, if I didn't do it, nobody was going to do it. So, you know.
Mr. Williams, people make the mistake of calling you a photographer. Of course, you are a documentarian and historian, and in the coming weeks, we can anticipate the book Unforgettable. Tell us a little bit about what we will see in this forthcoming publication.
Well, in the 4 books I've done relative to the civil rights movement, I tell it from the perspective of growing up where I think the epic center of the civil rights movement, Clarendon County, Orangeburg, and then spreading out, Columbia, Charleston, Greenville, and so forth. But Unforgettable is going to be a little different take. In Unforgettable, I'm telling the stories, and by the way, I think of myself as a photographer, yes, but I think even though I'm dealing mostly with still pictures, I still think that they have a storytelling quality, or a good picture can tell an important story, and it can lead one to wonder what was going on. And like, I imagine we have a lot of journalism students here, like the who, why, what, where, when, and these things can be captured in a still image, and it will last forever. Nothing, in my opinion, imitates life better than images. I think that's why they're so important to history. I grew up in a classroom where I studied like George Washington crossing the Delaware. And to me, that picture still stands out today. I can see George Washington now with his foot on the boat crossing the icy Delaware River. And so I grew up understanding the power and the capacity for pictures to tell the story. But Unforgettable, which makes its debut in 2 weeks, will portray just ordinary things I experienced especially in the period of 1950 to 1970, which I believe to be 2 decades of really all kinds of changes going on here, not only in South Carolina, but all over the world. And I believe that it was my destiny to be a person to capture these images and really tell the story, as Mr. Nelson has said, about the people that you don't really read about in history books, but they're really the people that made things work, the grassroots people that really made up and made all the changes we have seen take place.
Can I just add something? Yeah, I just want to say what an honor it is to be on stage with you, Cecil Williams, because I had heard of him way before we met. We actually used some photos of his in the HBCU film, but he and other photographers, black photographers, really did an unbelievable service by taking these pictures all across the South. And a lot of times they're our only photographic record that we have of African Americans. And as he was talking, I was thinking that how, there were a couple of things that black people, had to go to another black person to do, right? We had to go to a black person to get our hair cut. We had to go to a black person to preach. We had to go to a black person to get buried. And we had to go to a black person to get our photograph taken, right? And in cities all across the South, there were a few photographers like Mr. Williams who took these photos and just incredible record. It's the only record we have. Without that, black people, there would be no photographic record. But also one of the things that they did, and especially Cecil did, was step out of the studio. When the civil rights movement started, they stepped out of the studio and started taking pictures on the street and documenting this movement. And it's an incredible service. I know to me and other filmmakers, when we try to make a film, we couldn't have made it without you. So I just want to say thank you.
And there's a moment in the last clip you saw of the HBCU piece where the gentleman from Atlanta says, "We were starting a revolution." And the moment he says that, the next photograph is an image from Cecil Williams of a march. It's actually a photograph similar to the one on the stage here, of students marching at the State House here in Columbia in March of 1961. And Cecil, you had taken hundreds of photographs that day, but only now are we discovering their importance and their value.
Yes, and I owe a lot of thanks to Dr. Donaldson and the students at the University of South Carolina, because a lot of times in those days I didn't take very good information down by notes. In fact, when I worked for Jet Magazine beginning at 14 years old, my journalistic skills were so poor that they almost never dispatched me to a story unless they also sent a writer. That's how bad it was. Because I had I was good in taking pictures, but I very simply it took a lot of pain for me to write something down. And so when I got ready to do the books that I'm doing, it was the students in Dr. Donaldson's class, and Dr. Donaldson would really help me to supply the names and the identification. And then now, since I'm digitizing my negatives, that's also going to be, of course, contain the metadata, which will be so important to future historians as they begin to document tomorrow's books. And I see Dr. Marvin Leary in the audience, and the books like his books, which contain photographs, because I think photographs, again, helps to, it puts the icing, you might say, on the, it gives a different touch to the printed word. And I think they both complement each other. But I just want to say publicly thanks. And while I'm on it, I'd like to say that I was so passionate about being involved in this film that Mr. Nelson did, that back 4 or 5 months ago when I went to New York, I went by his studio. And it turned out that his studio is about 2 blocks from where my brother lived in New York. So it was quite a treat to go into his studio. And I was also very much at home because when I walked into his studio, I saw all these Mac computers that they were using to, create the film that you will be seeing. So thank you very much for those compliments.
Thank you. And it's worth a visit to Orangeburg if you ever want to see another amazing studio of Cecil Williams in Orangeburg, where he does his magic work as well.